Hello, everyone. I am Rick Thomas. I'm reviewing the Christianity Today podcast series, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. The title of this episode is Bonus Episode, Boca Raton's Church Planting OG. Thank you so much for jumping on this video. Again, I am Rick Thomas. If you have any questions for our ministry, if you want to talk about this series from Christianity Today, we have free community forums on our website. That is the place where we interact with anyone, whether it's about this or whatever is on your mind. It's really not appropriate in a more public space like the comment section of these videos to get into personal problems. And so we do have a private space and it doesn't cost you anything. And so if you want to talk about this series or anything else, just please jump over there. It's totally free. There is no catch whatsoever. If you're benefiting from our videos on our YouTube channel, please like the channel. That will help us to reach more people organically. And so if you hit the like button to any video and then subscribe to our channel, that would be fantastic. And of course, we love your comments, positive and negative. Just share what's on your mind, and we love to read your comments because quite honestly, the ones that are negative, it does help to guide. I want to hear what people are thinking. It's not about it always being positive, and so please share in a civil way what's on your mind. I have been doing an ongoing review of this podcast series from Christianity Today, and the title of this one, this is about number 12 that I've done, and the title of it is Boca Raton's Church Planting OG. OG means original gangster. Mike Hosper, what he's saying is not that the church planter is a gangster, but that he is the authority in this space. OG means this is the person who's like really someone that you want to talk to because they know what's happening. And in this context, he's talking about a church planting pastor that I will talk about in just a few moments. In this review, I want to do three things. I want to give you an overview of the big idea, and then I will do a brief overview of the episode, the actual podcast. And then number three, I want to make an application because my point in doing these reviews is not to give a play-by-play of the podcast series. You can just listen to it yourself if you want, and you can formulate, your own point-by-point thoughts. But what I want to do is to make personal application. I want to learn from it. I'm not looking at Mark Driscoll in a self-righteous way. I don't have anything unkind or harsh to say about him. But we can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. We can't reanimate Mars Hill Church, not that we would want to. And so I don't want to be overly critical of what happened there, but really I want to look at this series from an application perspective, and I trust that's your heart too, because we can learn from, quite frankly, the failures of others as we read the stories in the Old Testament, particularly, or even in the New Testament. Peter's denial, for example. We don't look at Peter in a self-righteous way because we recognize that we could be there too. And so we want to learn. How can we grow and mature through the observations that we make about people? And because Christianity Today is doing this series, my goal is not to be critical, but in an objective way and hopefully in a humble way that I can learn how to grow myself. And I trust that's your heart. And so three parts here. I want to give you a big idea of the episode, and then I want to give you a brief overview of the episode, a few details inside of it, and then I want to make a couple application points. And so the big overview or the big idea is that there is a thin line that's between standing for God and falling into pride. And there are two things that will help determine whether you're going to stand for God or fall into pride. And those two things are a person's character, who they are on the inside, and then what flows out of them, what flows out of their character, which is their gifts, their skills, their talents, their abilities, their behaviors. Our words come from our hearts. Our lips reveal what's inside. And so there is this continuity between who we are on the inside and what we say and do on the outside. And so if you want to assess yourself, to see if you're standing for God or falling into pride, the two assessments that you make: who am I on the inside, and how does that work out on the outside? If a person's character is wrong, if there's an idol factory, if there's ill intent, ill motivation, then what they will do is they will manipulate their talents, their skills, their abilities. They will manipulate it to satiate their own cravings. And so love, it's like love demands an object. I love you. Well, in this case, love turns back on itself. I love me. I am the subject and the object. If I have evil intention, if my character is not where it should be. But for the gospel-saturated person, they're going to resist pride's temptation. They're going to honestly evaluate their character, and then they're going to shape their behaviors, their abilities accordingly, because they love God, they love others more than anything else, and that's how they want to align their lives. And so that is the big idea of this episode. And so in the application part, in just a few moments, I want to talk about character, and then I want to talk about our gifts, our skills, our behaviors, our talents. But again, the title of this episode is Boca Raton's Church Planting OG. Mark Driscoll had a relationship with the church planting pastor in Boca Raton, Florida. His name was David Nicholas. David Nicholas has passed away. They did interview his wife in this episode. She seemed like a wonderful lady. But as you might imagine, the relationship between Mark and David went sour because Mark is, he's just a rogue, unaccountable Christian leader. This bonus episode is really just one more tack on, redundant rendering about Mark being Mark. If you have listened to any of the other episodes, then there's nothing here to add value as far as learning more about Mark. This is just a repeat. Christianity Today has shared this aspect of Mark's character and his personality repeatedly throughout the episodes that they have done. So this is really a redundant. They say it's a bonus episode. It would probably be fairer to say it's a redundant episode. It's a new story, but it's the same thing that they've been saying throughout. I get it by now. Mark is a horse that nobody can ride. Unless you want to dip into reality TV, an evangelical soap opera, if you want to do that, that's fine. But if you don't, then this episode is really not worth your time. And so that's all I have to say about it. But because it's out there, there are a couple of things that we can apply to our lives. And I do want to talk about those two things, our character. And then also, I want to talk about accountability, because that was a big deal in the fall of Mark Driscoll. His character was deformed, and he had no accountability. And it's not that people didn't try. They did try. Even in this episode, they suggested to him, they said, hey, Mark, why don't you have John Piper become your accountability partner? Mark shrugged that off. And the reason he shrugged it off is because he said, my church is bigger than John Piper's, which is a total baffling statement to make. When you're looking for accountability partners, you're not looking for the person with the largest church, the largest business, or the nicest car, or the biggest house, or whatever. What you're looking for is a person who has courage, a person who has compassion, a person who has the competence that the individual knows his or her Bible. They have the courage. They won't rubber stamp you. They have compassion. They won't beat you over the head with a hammer. Those are some of the things that you're looking for, not the size of an individual's church. And I do think it's important to state that there were several people at Mars Hill Church who tried to bring accountability to Mark, to try to bring that kind of care into his life. But because Mark's character was so deformed, he was resistant to accountability. And so with a deformed character and no accountability, well, that explains the fall part in the rise and fall of Mars Hill. And so for us, those are the two questions that we want to ask ourselves. Do we have a God-managed character? And do we have unique accountability in our lives? Let's look at both of those very briefly. Some people have said that character is who you are when nobody is looking. That is a poor definition or a poor illustration of what character is, because God is always looking. God is always there. When you bring in the doctrines of God's omnipresence, meaning God is everywhere, He's in your life, and then God's omniscience, He knows what you are thinking, then character is not who you are when no one's looking, because God is always looking. In Joseph's life, in Genesis 39:2, it says that God was with Joseph. I love those two words, with Joseph. When Joseph was going through this horrific circumstance, God's omnipresent. He was there. In fact, Joseph said that. In 50:20, he's talking to his brothers. You meant it for evil, God meant it for good. He was very aware God was there. And then in Hebrews 4, verse 13, it says that God knows the thoughts and intents of our hearts. And so not only is God omnipresent, He is sovereignly and providentially guiding our lives, but He also knows what we think, as we understand through the doctrine of omniscience. Now, for some people, that is not a comforting thought. If you were reared in a dictatorial, authoritarian, harsh, familial environment, and when you think about authority, and then you become a Christian and realize God is an authoritative person, it's so easy to conjoin those or conflate those two thoughts. And when you think about a God-managed character, that's not a comforting thought. Or maybe you've gone through a horrific church experience where authority was abused and where you were hurt by this authority structure within a, let's say, a religious environment. Either one of those things can shape you in such a way that when you think about God's authority, it's not a comforting thought. In fact, it can bring paranoia or worry or anxiety or fear. And you see a lot of that happening in our culture today, where people are just trying to shrug off all authority. They don't want any authority whatsoever. And it's most definitely happening within the church. That is an overreaction to a poor, objectively horrific experience. And so if you're in that boat to where when you think about a God-managed character, where God is shaping our character and He's taking the thoughts and intents of our heart and providentially guiding our lives because He wants to mold us into that new creation of Christ-likeness, if that doesn't bring gratitude out of your hearts and your mouths, then there's something that you want to address. Because who would not want God providentially guiding? God was with Joseph. We want God with us. Who would not want God knowing the thoughts and intents of our hearts? We want Him to get in there. It's like a doctor. You go to your doctor and he says, "What's wrong?" "I'm not going to tell you. I don't want you to know. I'm not going to take the MRI. I don't want you to take an X-ray. I don't want you to know what's going on inside of me." That's a form of insanity. And it's the same thing in the spiritual realm. We want God in our business. We want Him in our lives. We want Him knowing the thoughts and intentions of our hearts. That should bring gratitude, because He's the only one that can shape us into a Christ-like person. And so any person who doesn't have a God-managed character is set up to go off the rails. And that's what happened with Mark Driscoll. And then the second application point is unique accountability. He did not want John Piper or anyone else looking over his shoulder and giving him some direction and giving him accountability. I call it unique accountability. And the reason I say unique is because the accountability that you and I have in our lives, it has to be customizable accountability. I mean, being in a small group is fine. That's accountability in a general sense. Being in a church meeting or a church building on Sunday morning is fine, but that is even a more general kind of accountability, and we should have those. But then there is a unique customizable accountability where someone is uniquely speaking into our lives. That's the person who has that courage, has that competency, has that compassion that he knows us, he understands us, or she, and they will speak into our lives. Now, that unique accountability partner might not be the same person throughout your life. God regenerated me when I was 25, and when I go meet Jesus in my late 90s, it's not going to be the same accountability partner all the way through. And in the culture in which we live today, it's a transient culture, and there's seasons in our lives. And so what we will do is we will have different accountability partners throughout. And of course, that's my story. And for many of you, I know it's your story as well. It's okay to have a different accountability partner. You can change your Pauls all along. Paul had me here. Now there's another Paul in my life. Now I have a third Paul in my life. That's fine as long as they're providing unique accountability that's customizable to you, to who you are. Mark Driscoll did not have a God-managed character, and he did not have unique, customizable accountability. And because of those two factors, they contributed to the fall part of the rise and fall of Mars Hill. And so, do you have a God-managed character? What do you need to change? What do you need to assess and address? And do you have unique accountability, customizable accountability, someone speaking into your life? Is there something you need to change there? Then I would just appeal to you to ask God to show you how to make those changes. If we can serve you in any way, please jump on our ministry's website. Again, there's no catch whatsoever. Our team would be more than willing to answer any questions about what I'm talking about here in this video, the entire series, or anything else that's on your mind. Thanks so much for watching.